So I'm Erik Tveteraas, investment director in Nutreco, which is the corporate venturing arm of Nutreco, the global feed company. Or I, together with the team, focus most of our time on land-based farming, but contrary to popular belief, we also look into other approaches such as offshore and closed containment in the sea systems. We've made 5 investments so far in land-based salmon farming companies and approaching just north of 50 million euros invested to date.
So, Erik, I would like to bring the conversation to you as Nutreco's invested, or Nutreco New Frontiers, which is the venture capital arm of the company, has invested in 5 companies. You've gone through the due diligence process. Nutreco has a long history with aquaculture and understands the space. How do you, and I guess, as Maggie said, this year there's been a lot of noise and speculation and some doubts starting to creep in. How does Nutreco, as a long-term investor, look at 2021 and where we are at right now?
Sure. So I think you mentioned a keyword right there, that we, as a long-term investor and a strategic investor in this space, we have a certain luxury of not being seeking a specific exit horizon or a certain financial return within a certain time frame, and that allows us to view the risk profile of land-based farming, whether salmon or shrimp or new species, in a different lens than I think other investor types would. So we've always viewed, for example, biological risk or operating risk as acceptable risk factors to us. We know there will be ups and downs and bumps in the road. And with traditional aquaculture, it will for sure not have a linear path going from pilot scale and through revenue generation without any hiccups. So having that luxury allows us to take that view. So for us, it's always been, and even more so now, just financing risk in general. For the companies that we pay particular attention to. So in the 5 companies that we diligenced, we took an exceptionally strong look at the financing strategy of the companies, which up until now, I guess it's fair to say to a certain extent, has been reliant on, let's call it the Nordic capital markets model, pioneered by Atlantic Sapphire, and more so than we did in the past. There's only one company in our portfolio which was fully financed for phase 1 of its operations, which made that particular hurdle obviously a lot easier for us to overcome in that case.
Right. And I guess something I was keen to ask you was, as outsiders, we see a lot of the data from the publicly traded companies in Oslo, and that's sort of, I guess, what the outside world sees. Yourselves, I think there's 1 or 2 actual operating facilities in your portfolio. How do you look at it? Because you look at different data to the rest of us. Do you see a growing stability in these production systems? How does that look from where you are?
Well, I'd say yes and no. As you pointed out, some of the companies in our portfolio are listed today. So there are obvious legal and regulatory barriers in terms of information that they can provide to us. So it's not the case that we are insiders and privy to any other information than the market. Having said that, we have taken an approach within our portfolio that we would like to learn and contribute with our learning and know-how to the extent that we can. For example, we do have a requirement, or have had a requirement for investments to establish so-called technical advisory committees, which are advisory bodies only towards the board and or management, where we would like to have a role in that committee. And but not just for us, we also invite other stakeholders in the investor group and the technology provider and people from management itself to use that body as an organ for making the right decisions in, for example, detailed engineering or operations.
So Erik, one thing, Nutreco and Skretting operates in the traditional aquaculture. You know your clients very well. One of the things that really captures my attention is the fact that the conventional sea pen farmers in salmon operate RAS systems and RAS technology on a very large scale. Post-smolt seems to be the quickest way to increase salmon output in the world. I guess, how come do you think that sector hasn't taken the full step to actually investing in these projects? Nutreco has been quite bold and invested in some of them. We haven't seen the actual producers, the big producers, get involved. Do you, any theories on that one, or perhaps they're just waiting to see with technology?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think there's one single answer to that. I think there's many factors in play. If you look at the technology, so the RAS in post-smolt, smolt and post-smolt is a more proven technology at this stage, and that is to a large extent related to the fact that salmon, I guess in contrast to human beings, juvenile salmons are very easy to deal with. They're not as sensitive as they eventually become when they go into the grow out phase. So it's a more has been and is a much more manageable part of the salmon life cycle in general. That's one reason. Another, I think, is there has been for decades a very, very strong ecosystem developed in, especially in Norway, but also the other major producing countries around conventional aquaculture, knowledge sharing, and developing that industry. So it's always easier to go for incremental gain or incremental improvements within the same ecosystem and production area that you already know. And then finally, I think a third reason is that many of the major companies, this is just a theory, but many of the major companies are listed companies. So theoretically, I think there's an argument that if one or more would to take a major leap into land-based salmon farming, it is somehow cannibalizing existing assets and revenue streams. But that's just a theory.
Thank you. Erik, I'm going to come to you. So for Nutreco, what's the minimum amount of revenue for a RAS project to consider for investments? And your kind of min-max numbers, I guess, for investing in any of these projects?
For the company?
I guess, yeah, for project value and
so several answers to that. So by revenue is obviously a factor of what you're able to sell at. We've taken the view that that salmon is a commodity species. So I guess you could say that we have a quite conservative view when it comes to pricing. So any project that we look at would need to stand on its own two legs and be profitable selling at commodity pricing. So without any significant premium built into the price. That's not to say that we don't believe it's possible, but we don't we don't move ahead with cases that are dependent on very high premium prices to generate profit. So that's one. Second leg is volume. Coming back to Karl Øystein's comment on what sort of a volume break-even level for RAS. We don't know that either, but we have generated quite some proprietary data in all our due diligence, and I don't think it, at least in our calcs, doesn't require tens and tens of thousands of tons. But yes, the 500-ton farms, 1,000 tons farms, we also would be highly skeptical of in terms of generating healthy profit over time. We have this one data point, which is not great, which is Danish salmon in Denmark, whom I think were originally designed with design capacity of around 2,000 tons. And that's a design capacity, but arguably that's a previous generation RAS design and inefficient in terms of what the design capacity would be, and then generating around 1,000 tons a year, so half of what it was designed to. And that's barely break even, perhaps a little bit below that. So if I'm going to give just a range, I would say you would need to be at least at the 2,500 tons and up,
right,
to have a viable business.
Great. And this person is asking about shrimp, and we did talk about shrimp in our previous conversation. What's your perspective on shrimp RAS?
Yeah, good question. I'd like to distinguish there between, there's kind of two technology philosophies there. There's the clear water RAS shrimp philosophy that's you could say is more similar to land-based salmon farming, in that it's recirculating all the or most of the water, and the general aim is to filter out as much as possible of the waste and keep as clean a water as possible to maximize growth. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is called biofloc RAS, which is an approach where nutrients in the water is conserved, and the wastewater in the water is subjected to a mechanism where it generates a lot of heterospheric growth in the water, which the shrimp then ultimately feeds on as well, in addition to feed itself, which would lead to a lower environmental footprint because there's less discharge, and also lower feed costs. The downside to that is that it could be potentially very difficult to manage. The water chemistry is very complex, and it requires a lot of we have a German loan word in Norwegian called fingerspitzgefühl, that you really know what you're doing, and it's a certain factor of let's call it intuition and learning by experience in order to run those systems successfully. And frankly, we don't know yet what the optimal approach is with a clear water or biofloc RAS.
Erik, I'm going to come back to you. We have a question from somebody based in Asia on asking a pretty similar question about what we were just talking about, which is stocking density and what is profitable. But in this case with Barramundi, is this a species? This is quite an interesting species, because I think people are talking about it could become the next salmon. Not sure if that's a little bit hyped, but have you seen land-based projects in that space? And if not, I mean, are there any other species you think could really take off in land-based?
I've not personally seen any land-based Barramundi projects. We do think it's a species with a potential in general, also for conventional aquaculture. There's a company that recently raised a significant amount of equity for conventional aquaculture of Barramundi in Southeast Asia. As to the biological performance of Barramundi in RAS, I'm unfortunately not an expert on that species, so I wouldn't be able to tell, unfortunately.
Yeah, but are there any other species that you think in land-based, gosh, that could really take off?
Yes and no. I mean, I think there's a reasonable argument that Yellowtail is a suitable fish for land-based farming. It's a very robust species. It's exceptionally high growth compared to salmon, but it's not as a commoditized species as salmon is. So there are limits to how many companies and how much growth you can achieve in. So for us to be, if you were to be convinced to invest in a company focusing on, for example, Yellowtail, we would take a much more closer look at your sales strategy, valued. You had across to markets where that fish could succeed, etc. But do I think there will be a new salmon? No.
Erik, just a quick, a quick message to the audience. We have a lot of questions. We're just extending by a few minutes, but we'll finish at 10 minutes past the hour. So we got 8 minutes left, and that's our lot. So, Erik, as now Nutreco has done several projects, and you look at the cost breakdown and that MPV model, how do you look at the breakdown of costs in a RAS project, and maybe what have been your learnings over time as you've done the due diligence on several projects now?
Yeah, I mean, Karl is right that by far the biggest cost is feed. I've seen ranges from between 40 to 60% per kilo produced. 40 to 60% of that cost would be attributable to the feed. So that is that's obviously something you can't get around. The fish needs to eat, and then eat optimal feed. Developed for specifically for RAS, which I know that Skretting is spending a very significant proportion of its research activities on. Apart from that, there is a bit more sensitivity to energy prices, much more than so RAS would be more or less resilient to spikes in that if there is no direct energy connection to the RAS site.
Perfect.
Then, apart from that, of course, you have your labor and your farm management, and we actually do spend quite a bit of our attention in that area as well, because I think down the line, when RAS CREO has been more matured, it allows for greater automation and greater use of digital farming to drive production decisions and optimally manage your biomass, which would allow lower labor costs. I think at where we currently are in the development cycle, I wouldn't bet on the automation potential to be utilized for some years yet. But there is potential there to reduce labor's share of the cost breakdown.
quick fire last question to everybody. Do you think there are any known unknowns or unknown unknowns out there that could change this debate in a year or 5 years? Maggie, anything that people are not talking about right now that could change this entire scenario for land-based?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, no worries. Any known unknowns or unknown unknowns? Things that might change the whole debate on RAS land-based.
I think where we're presently at will open up an opportunity for other pockets of capital to take a step into this scene. For example, maybe because of this reliance so far on Nordic capital markets, we've not really seen a huge amount of family office capital gone into this sector. But we know there are, take US, for example, Atlantic Sapphire and others. US has the greatest concentration of family offices in the world. Many of them are highly devoted to sustainability and ESG. And I cannot see any reason for those types of investors to not go into this space as well. And with the story, Matt, if we have some time,
go for it.
On because we talk a lot about, of course, we're looking ahead and 30, 40 years into the future. But this whole discussion reminds me of a story I've heard internally, and this is a true story that back in 1969, Skretting started out its first commercial trials with pelletized feed for what was then a trout farming operation. And this was back in the day when the cages were slightly less complex than they are today, made of wood and metal grids. And the result of that trial was a 98% mortality rate using pelletized feed. And that was obviously the feed formulations were a bit different then. That was considered a tremendous success because 2% of the fish survived, which proved that it was possible to feed fish with something else than live feed, which was the standard of the day, and that was not sustainable in the long run. But any investor back then, looking at that trial, we would not ever blame that investor from walking away. And that investor would have missed out on an industry that has grown from essentially nothing to a multi-billion dollar industry. So I think it's useful to look at what has happened in the past as well and try to extrapolate that into the future.
Yeah, it's a great point, Erik, and you look at the Chile in the 1970s and it turned from nothing into the second biggest economic activity in the entire country, in where I'm sat right now, and provided employment to the south of the country that didn't have any principal industry. It's a great point.